Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Welcome. Hoping you can hear me. There we go. Okay. Oh, my screen sure looks blue. It's very blue in here apparently today. Welcome, everybody. Just getting everything set up here. Itching my nose before we start. I'm happy to have you all here, and thank you for adjusting your schedules and joining me on a Tuesday instead of our usual Monday. I've started teaching art at my children's school. I'm teaching grades 5 and 6 and then grades 7 and 8 as well, 2 days a week. So that's going to keep me busy for this term, the next few weeks, a couple months, whatever it is. And I'm looking forward to interacting with kids. Teaching kids is very different than teaching adults. Most of the time they just, whereas adults often in my watercolor classes are very hesitant because they don't want to make a mistake, kids are more like, why does she not stop talking so we can start painting? So it's a fun dynamic, and I always learn lots when I'm teaching kids. And I'm teaching not just painting but drawing as well. So we're going to have a lot of fun with that. Yesterday we did comic strips. And that was fun. I like thinking, what I was trying to introduce to them was this idea that art tells a story. And we use some different art through the ages to look at, the different stories we could see in some old and new paintings, as well as the way we use art to tell stories in children's books, in comics, which is what we ended up drawing. And I just had a lot of fun just talking about how a picture can say so many things. And so that was lots of fun. And now I'm here with you guys. So get to do lots of teaching during this time of year, which is a lot of fun. I'm going to move over to my work surface in just a minute, but I want to just talk to you a little bit about the description down below the video, because there is a lot of content there this week. And so I just want to go over it very quickly. We're going to talk about some ways of using paint, a concept that I learned from another artist, and we're going to talk about that. But I also have a link to 2 books that I'm going to recommend to you. I have links to, my mind's going blank now. There's just a lot of content there, and we'll get to that. I think one thing I wanted to mention is I've just finally finalized the details for my local watercolor workshop. And ordinarily when I'm teaching watercolor in my community, I teach once a week for about 8 weeks. And so it's not something that is really open to someone who doesn't live in the area. But I'm going to do a 2-day workshop in February 2017, February 3rd and 4th. And the cool thing about this is I am also at the very same time having a solo art show in our local art gallery, the Dawson Creek Art Gallery, which is an amazing building housed in a historic grain elevator. And it's a beautiful gallery, and I'm excited to be having a solo show of my work there. I'll have about 40 paintings on display. And in conjunction with that, I'll also be teaching a 2-day watercolor workshop. We're going to do 1 day learning painting focusing on landscapes, and then a 2nd day painting florals. And if you'd like to experience a little bit of a northern winter, you're sure welcome to come up and join us. The link to the information is in the description, as well as a whole bunch of other information. So we're going to get to that. And I just want to again say welcome to everyone who has joined me. Thank you for being here and making time out of your day to come and join me live. This is really fun for me to be able to share watercolor with you. Hoping everybody can, I see lots of hellos from all over the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening where you are. Here it is still it's afternoon. I guess it feels like morning for me. I did eat my lunch though. Yeah, so we're just gonna get together. I see everyone saying hello. I'm hoping you can see me as well as hear me. If you're having trouble with sound or video, take time and just refresh your browser. Sometimes that's really all it needs. So what we're going to talk about today is something that was asked me is often asked by beginning watercolorists, and that's just trying to get a feel for how much paint to use. And I see there's usually one of 2 things going on with beginning painters. Either you're using not enough paint and water and you're struggling with having all these little short brush marks showing on your paper, or it's the opposite. You're using so much paint that you have like a kind of a crusty feel on your paper. And so we want to find a balance between that. And that's not always easy to explain. Some teachers, I think we really have a tendency to say, oh, you just have to get a feel for it and it takes practice. But there are a few things you can look for to help you understand how much paint to use at the different stages of your painting and what it should feel like. And so we're going to go over that here. So I'm just going to switch my camera over, and of course I'll just go back to my title screen while I do that, so you don't get dizzy as I move this camera. And once I get it centered on my work surface, and then we can get started. And I really can't take all the credit for what we're going to talk about today. As much as I love explaining concepts as I start to understand them, sometimes you find another artist who just uses maybe a better terminology or a better description, and that's what happened to me in this situation. So here we have my painting surface. This is just another little piece of 6-inch watercolor paper. I've been painting 6-inch paintings for the last few weeks, and I'm really enjoying it. Here's just a few of them. This is a painting of tulips that's going up on my website tomorrow. This you may have seen. I did a live Facebook video where I was adding white ink, and the ink actually has dried and left little cracks in the blobs of ink, which I think is really beautiful and adds this interesting texture. And I don't very often use ink in my paintings, but that you got to make an exception once in a while when you have some inspiration. This one went up on my website today. I called it Fiery Foliage. It really gives me the feeling of just a blaze of autumn colors. And I'm really enjoying the combination of orange and violet right now, especially like a red violet or a magenta. Really beautiful combination. If you haven't tried it, you really should. And then this one you may have seen on my email newsletter if you get my email newsletter. And this floral will be going up on my website later this week as well. So that's just a few little 6-inch paintings. 6-inch paintings are fun because you can just do them really quickly. And so we're just going to start out talking about maybe working with your first layer of paint. And I think if you've been working with cheap watercolors, a lot of times they're very hard and just like a solid cake in the palette. And I should have brought my cheap watercolor palette up to show you. I'm thinking of like children's watercolor paint, and you know how it's almost like a block of chalk or something. So in order to get pigment off of that, it takes a little bit of work to get a rich color of paint because it's just so hard. On the contrast, when I have added paint to my palette, which you see here, and I've added it from a tube, most of the time those tube paints don't dry really firm. They have a little bit of spring to them almost, especially if you paint as often as I do. So I like to add them to my palette and let them dry, and it takes a little time for them to get firm. But the thing that happens then is I find I waste less because I can't just scoop up this whole blob with my brush. You know, I have to stroke at it to get the color that I want. When the pigment is moist, it's very easy to scoop up a big chunk, you paint a little bit, then you go to rinse your brush and you lose any paint that's left on your brush, just gets rinsed away and down the drain. So that's why I like to add my paint to my palette like this. Some artists prefer to buy it in pans, and there is a slightly, I'm told there's a slightly different formulation between tube paints and pan paint, where the tube paints don't always dry as nicely. I haven't really done any comparisons, so I really can't speak for that. I like my tube paints. I like that I can fill my palettes however I want, and with as much paint as I want. So that's just a little bit about why I do it the way I do. So moving on. So what we want to do is really we want to avoid having a thick layer of goopy paint on our paper, because watercolor is intended to be transparent for one thing. So that means when I put a wash of pigment, some of that paper is going to show through. And when I have a thick amount of pigment, and that's a fairly juicy amount, there's still some of the vibrancy of the paper showing through. If I were to just take a blob of paint and stick it on here in a thicker layer, of of course, it's not going to be transparent anymore. It's just a thick chunk. So we want to keep that beautiful transparency, whether we're working with rich dark pigment or pale thin washes. And I'm just going to add a little water to soften that up. I don't want to waste this piece of paper, so I'm going to be demonstrating, but I'm also going to be thinking of trying to kind of have a pretty little abstract thing going on that maybe I can play with later. And I don't know if you see a comparison here to something in life, but as I'm using lots of water here and this phthalo turquoise pigment is spreading out, it's getting very light and clear. And what it makes me think of is tea. If you put a tea bag in a cup of hot water, you get a very light, transparent color as well. And your tea is, especially if you have one of those beautiful clear mugs, you can see through the mug and it's just tinted with the color of the tea. And so I like to think of when I'm starting a painting, and this is where I'm borrowing a concept from another artist. Marc Taro Holmes is the one who, as far as I know, coined this idea of calling your first, thinking of your first amount of paint, your first layer of paint, as kind of the tea layer, where you're working with thinner washes, you're keeping it light and transparent, you're tinting your water with your pigment. And it might be easier for you to do that by mixing a puddle in your palette and adding water, especially if you're quite a beginner and you're not sure how much water to add and how much paint to use. That's what those wells in your palette are for. Gives you the time to kind of test out some different amounts of color. So here's just, I'm not even sure what color that is. I think it's Perylene Violet with a little bit of water. And it's actually a really rich dark color when it's used in it pure and not with a lot of water. But right now we're just thinking tea. And you can see it's quite transparent. It flows quite a bit and it mixes well with what's already on the paper. So that's the tea layer. And when you're painting your first layer, you really don't want to use thick layers of paint because you're going to be going over top of it with additional paint. If you had a thick, crusty amount of paint, because it's watercolor, as soon as you moisten that amount, that paint, that layer, it would start to move. It would almost be like having like one of these blobs in my palette that is dried. As soon as I wet it, I can move that color around. And that's the same with a chunk of paint sitting on your palette or a crust of it. So we want to just have kind of that watery tea effect because then it's going to be also absorbed into your paper a little bit and we'll be able to better put further layers of paint over top. If that makes sense? And the color I put on first is phthalo turquoise, I believe, or actually ultramarine turquoise is what my palette says. I just had to wash away the words there. I always try to put the name of the paint in a permanent pen on the edge of my palette. So we call it the tea layer, and I have a link in the description of this video because Marc Taro Holmes has created this little sheet, and actually I think it's designed to be folded into quarters. And this is kind of a cheat sheet for someone who's wanting to understand layers of paint and how much pigment to use. And he calls it tea, milk, and honey. So we're going to talk a little bit about the milk layer in just a moment. And I stole his phrase, tea, milk, and honey, but I use it in my own way as well. But I like, because as watercolorists, we do tend to work in similar methods a lot of the time. And when you're painting in these lighter colors, we're also concentrating on bigger shapes. So, now would be the time when I would decide, where the dominant shapes are in my painting. And I'm just going to be creative here and do something a little bit abstract. And using, again, more water than pigment. If I accidentally take more pigment than I need, and it goes down really dark, I don't panic and blot it away. I try to find a way to use it. So I might now I'll rinse a little bit, have some water on my brush, but then I can take this too much paint and just give it room to move. And as I let it flow, I get back to that paler color that I was hoping for originally. I'm going to add some more of that Perylene Violet because I think they're playing quite nicely together. And this, yeah, again, I'm thinking of the major shapes in my painting. And if you're painting a building, then you're just getting that outer shape of the building down. If you're painting an animal, you know, you're getting the basics down because we start out loose and we want to add detail and go tighter as we continue to paint. And then once you've got those basic layers down, then you can start to tighten up. You can start to reinforce these building blocks that you've placed on your paper. Now I have a wet painting here, so I can't really do my usual second layer thing without allowing it time to thoroughly dry. So we're just going to kind of paint over it and just pretend it's dried and talk about that second layer, which Marc Taro Holmes calls milk. And I like that idea of milk because it gives you an idea of the balance between paint and water. That it's almost an equal balance, I would say. You can think of your paint as having more of an inky consistency. And I'm going to grab some of this Sodalite Genuine. It's a beautiful textured color. And I'm going to mix it with a little bit of that Perylene Violet. And I'm just going to put it over here. Take a look at how strong and dark that color is right there. There's not a lot of transparency there. There's a little bit. You can see where it's touching. There's still some fluidity there. It's not a dry amount of pigment. It's still juicy, but it's much stronger and bolder and less transparent. It doesn't mean your milk layer is going to be all of these strong, bold, dark colors, because of course you can choose a color that has a lighter value. Let's see what I have in my palette that I could use here for that. I'll use this cobalt or ultramarine blue, and I'm just going to mix right on the palette well right here an inky amount or a milky amount. I like the term inky. Marc Taro Holmes uses milk. I like ink, but they're kind of the same idea. And again, it's just going to be a thicker, stronger wash of paint. It's not as transparent as tea. It's a little bolder and it flows a little less. It's a little less watery. So that's that feeling for your second layer of paint. Just learning to kind of pay attention to the consistency of the paint and let it kind of do its thing. And rinsing my brush again. And I always like to blot just a little bit so it's not super juicy. I can always pick up a little more water if my brush gets too dry. And this is the stage as well where ordinarily I would be painting with that inky amount of paint on dry paper, so I have more control. That very first layer we were letting a lot of things flow. Even though we started with dry paper, it's almost a wet on wet technique because as you keep painting, as I kept painting, I'm adding more water, and at the end the whole paper's wet and everything's kind of soft and flowing together. So this second layer is generally a layer where you're adding those stronger details, that inky paint, but you're working with a little more control because you're on dry paper. Okay, just taking a look, checking in at the question areas, so I can kind of keep up with what's happening on the chat part of the video. Okay, we're going to just talk finally about the last layer, and Marc Taro Holmes calls it honey. And I'm not sure, I don't know, I like my honey pretty sticky, so, so mine's not so much like honey, but this is the idea where you're using mostly paint and very, very little water so that you have a lot of control. And I'm just going to actually pull over a scrap of paper so we can talk about that, because this is just too wet to really get that effect with. But so my brush is a little damp, it's not dripping with water, so I can pick up some color from my palette, and I'm going to go back to that ultramarine turquoise. And here, this final layer, you know, you have a lot of control. You can see right now when I stroke my brush, it actually skips a little bit across the texture of the paper. And that's because, you know, my brush isn't soaking wet. So there's a little bit of dryness there where color doesn't just instantly fall into all those little hollows on the paper. I can decide if I want to fill that in. It's still juicy enough that I can do that, but if I'm brushing quickly, it's going to skip across the paper. So I have more control of what's happening with my brush. I've also got a much stronger, darker color than I did over here. And so this kind of thing, and I think that one thing we should pay attention to is when you're working with that amount of pigment, we're not doing a lot of painting. This is for the very end of your painting, putting in those strong final details, kind of like exclamation points. I don't know about you, but when I write an email or write something, I really have to restrain myself from putting exclamation points at the end of every sentence. You know, we need to place them carefully so that we don't just sound insane. I don't know. You know, we want to be controlled with that kind of strong expression in our writing, and in our painting it's the same thing. These strong, bold darks, using a lot of paint but not a lot of pigment, or not a lot of water, sorry. That's reserved for the end of your painting, for those final details and that controlled expression. So most of the time, and so that's, and if we look back at our tea layer, that's really the bulk of our painting, has at least a little bit of that tea wash on it in some color. And then we go in with a little less paint, filling the area a little less with our inky, our milk layer. So there's that idea of not only as you go are you using a little less water and a little more paint, but you're also filling your painting surface with less painting. You're placing your brush strokes more carefully, and you're refining your design. So does that make sense? Does that give you a little bit of an idea of what you should be looking for at the different stages of your painting? And do you have any questions? What a great question. What if exclamations are light rather than dark? That's a great question. We have to plan for our light areas just as much as we do for our darks. In fact, almost more so, because they have to follow along with us throughout the whole painting. So, you know, these little, I've only got a couple little white flecks here in this painting, although if I were to paint around this area with a dark color, it would look much lighter. So we do have to do some planning if we want to leave whites in our painting. And that definitely that needs to go with us throughout. So as you're painting, you know, you put that first layer down. It's pretty easy to leave some white space in that very first layer of painting. But as you keep painting and adding more paint, it's very easy to lose those lights. So you're able to be quite loose and relaxed with that first layer of paint. And then as you continue into your painting and do those successive layers, you're not just painting less, but you're thinking more. You're planning a little bit more, and you're really trying to observe what's happening on your painting, and you know, keep those beautiful moments that happen in those first layers. For me, with these loose 6-inch paintings, there's a lot of unexpected things that happen. I'll start with one brush stroke and then kind of follow it and see what it looks like to me and what it suggests. And right now I've got these really interesting little edges that were created with my ultramarine turquoise. The paint was a little bit drier here and a little bit wetter around here, so it created these beautiful little texture areas. So I would use that to guide me as I make decisions in my painting. And you know, and so as I go, I have to be more intentional about what I'm painting and what I'm leaving behind as well. Great questions from everybody. The brush I'm using today is my Escoda Versatile number 10 Rigger. And there is actually a link on my website, angelafehr.com, that you can use to track down a source for these brushes. They are sometimes hard to find because they tend to sell out pretty quickly. I don't know if that's just my good advertising or what. The colors I used today, I did not link up, but I cannot throw them in if you guys are asking. If you guys are interested in knowing that, I can add them to the description after the video ends. Rhonda's asked, where do I find info on my workshops? All my info is on my online classes is on my website. You can go directly to learn.angelafehr.com or to my main site, angelafehr.com, to find info on pretty much everything I have available on the internet. And my website's always a work in progress, but I'm pretty sure all the links are working right now. Other questions? There is also the information on my workshop in Dawson Creek, BC in February. That is in the description for this video if you just patiently scroll down, because there's a lot of information in the description today. Let's see here. Bev asks, would I say the second layer of paint is a glazing layer? Yeah, I tend to, the term glaze, I tend to use as building up, adding layers of paint to build and strengthen the shapes and forms in your painting. So you're definitely glazing when you're doing that second layer. You're creating, strengthening the shapes of your painting. I did link up to this really great little cheat sheet by Marc Taro Holmes. There is a link to that as well in the description. I really like the way he talks about it, because while I don't draw, I don't do pencil sketching like he does, so I can't really talk about this whole spend half your time drawing thing that he mentions, but talking about the time you spend on the different parts of your painting, light, shadow, and dark, working wet to dry, working big shapes to small details. Those are all concepts that I use continually when I'm painting. So I found this little sheet really useful. Kind of makes me think I should build my own one of these days, but really, who has the time? Yeah, some really great little tips. He talks about a couple of techniques as well, pulling, and I think that says dragging in. My printer cut it off a little bit. And then even talking about how to arrange your landscape as you're sketching. So whether you're a sketcher or not, you could. This little printout is very useful, and I encourage you to check that out. Again, linked up in the description. I'm just going to switch my camera over one more time, folks. There we go. And then we'll wrap this up. Oh, I have a couple books I want to recommend as well. I promised I would do that. It's amazing how fast half an hour goes by. Okay. Leslie asked, would I consider doing a workshop somewhere else? My travel time is very limited because I do have a young family that seems to like having me around, but I love to travel, and so I do try to work in, if I'm going to be somewhere, I love to teach as well, and I'm very open to being invited to teach wherever you happen to be. If you have a group that's interested and you know, we can work out the details, I'd be happy to be there, and just send me an email and we'll talk about it. Yeah. Great concept. Great questions, everybody. Oh, Vivian, hi. Vivian and I met at my Jasper, Alberta workshop last summer. Good to see you here. I am working on a video right now to answer your question about waxing paintings instead of framing them under glass. I have been doing some mounting on wood panel and then waxing the painting. And so I videoed the process. I just need to edit it, and then I'll post it on YouTube and let you all know about it. So watch for that. It is a very cool technique. Okay, I have two books I want to tell you about. I've been wanting to, I have a fairly large library of watercolor books, so I've been wanting to talk a little bit about those. And so these artists are both people who who inspired me at a very pivotal time in my art development. And I was at a stage where I was getting much more comfortable with watercolor skills. And so I was thinking, a lot about my style. And really, I remember there was a day I was doing a painting and I covered this big sheet of paper with color, and I loved it. I was so excited about it, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, it's such a beautiful first layer. I wish I could just leave it this way. But no one would understand it. And then I proceeded to add second and third and fourth layers of paint and completely wrecked the whole painting. And so then I discovered two artists that they motivated me, because what I saw in their paintings helped me to realize that they were painting exactly the way I dreamed that I could paint, but was afraid no one would understand. And so it gave me the courage to kind of explore my own style to be willing to get looser and risk that whole thing about people not being able to understand it. And so one of them was Linda Kemp, and she's a Canadian artist. And this is her book, Watercolor Painting Outside the Lines. And she is actually painting mostly in acrylic right now, but this book is watercolor. And she's a master of negative painting. So if you want to learn about negative painting, and you love a loose style, this painting really gets me excited. There we go. It's just so beautiful. It looks like berries and leaves and foliage, and I absolutely love it. And it inspired me. It made me think, you know what, I can paint the way I want to paint and not worry so much about whether or not people will understand it. So, great book. Really love it. It does help clarify some of the understanding of negative painting as well. And the other artist you probably already know is Jean Haines, and this is her book, Atmospheric Watercolors. And this book, I discovered Jean a little after Linda Kemp. And again, Jean has this amazing confidence in her viewer that she says, I don't have to paint every detail. I know you can understand this and be excited by it without me having to spell everything out for you. And, you know, some of her paintings just have so much beautiful looseness, and you really get the sense that she absolutely loves watercolor. And I do too, so we're kindred spirits there. So yeah, and not just that, but when I read the book, instead of just looking at the pictures, I realized that she also was giving her readers permission to have confidence in themselves, that you can tackle any subject you're interested in, you can paint anything you want, be motivated by, you know, your own internal self because you're the only one who can paint like you. And that book was hugely encouraging to me. As much as I was excited by her style, her way of speaking about watercolor and the tools she gave artists to just encourage them and motivate them, that spoke to me even more. And that's something I really try to do when I'm teaching, because I know how important it is to learn how to drown out that little angry voice that says, or fearful voice that says, I just don't have what it takes. You do, and you can. And you're the only one who can paint that inner thing that wants to come out, because you're the only one who can see and hear and feel it. So that's the two books that I'm recommending today, and there are links to those down in the description as well. I think that's all I had prepared. Again, I will be posting a video on how to wax and mount your paintings on board. This is a little wooden panel that I ordered, and then I was able to just really, in very little time, mount my painting and wax it on. It takes a couple of days just to let all the layers dry, but it's really not too difficult, and I love the kind of contemporary look that it gives. And yeah, Experimental Landscapes in Watercolor by Anne Blockley is also excellent. Yes, I have that one as well, and I'll probably mention it in a future lesson. And again, I want to thank you guys for being here. Oh, the fixative I use, I see you guys are talking about fixatives. The one I use is by Krylon, and it is called Camar Varnish. And that's the one I've been using. It doesn't seem to really, you spray a thin layer on, it doesn't seem to do a lot to affect the look of the painting. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much finished what I had prepared here. Hopefully some of what we talked about will clarify your understanding of how much paint to use, how much water to use, and when. I love just simplifying it down. I think 3 points is pretty much all I can remember when I'm painting. So that idea of, you know, working bigger shapes to smaller shapes, it's simple, it's easy to follow when you're actually in a painting. Using more water in the beginning and less water at the end. These are things we can remember and understand. So I hope that helps you. And the main thing really is log those brush miles, spend lots of time experimenting and exploring. Even when your painting doesn't turn out, you're still learning something. So thank you for joining me today, you guys. I'm so glad you could be here. I can't fit you all into my actual studio, but it's pretty cool that we can connect like this through the internet. It's just amazing what technology does. I love it. And thanks for joining me today. do take a look at the description for any resource links that I may have mentioned too quickly for you to write down. And have a great day and a great rest of the week. And I'll say goodbye. I'm Angela Fehr.